our discussion of Days of Heaven. We are very happy to see your names and to hear your comments. I am joined by Lisa DeNight. Lisa, how are you this evening?
I'm doing very well, Andrew. Thank you. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Fine. And thank you for suggesting this film that got, at least if numbers are any indication, a very positive response from our students. So we should have quite a good discussion this evening. To participate in the discussion, everybody, please allow me to remind you that you should keep your audio on mute unless I call on you. And I will call on you because you will raise your hand. How will you raise your hand? Using that little raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen with the number 2 above it. At that point, I will see whose hands are raised and I will call your name. And then we would ask you to please unmute yourself, ask your question or make your comment, and then remute yourself as Lisa and I respond. It's important to stay muted otherwise, so there isn't any sort of background noise, shenanigans or anything. We also utilize the chat function. Our colleague Jill is monitoring that for things that generate a lot of steam, so to speak. She'll let me know and we can talk about it in a larger group, but it's a wonderful place to share a stray thought you might have or to introduce yourself. We are particularly happy to welcome our participants from outside of the greater Philadelphia area. If you are one of those folks, please say hi in the chat, but also, if you're so inclined, go to the Where in the World section on brynmarfilm.org and let us know where you're from and how you think we're doing and how you heard about us, et cetera, et cetera. Please be honest, we can take it. And we love hearing where folks are from. We have folks from all over the country and abroad as well. So it's really, really great. And with that, I believe we can get to the start of our discussion. And as is often the case, I see David has his hand up first. David, how are you this evening?
I am well, and thank you. I really enjoyed Lisa's introduction, and I'm going to make 1 or 2 brief comments and then ask her to elaborate as well as you, Andrew, on one aspect. I mean, this was just a beautiful film to watch. The characters, I'm sure you're going to give us a little bit more development, but the cinematography was just relatively, I would say, amazing, even on the scale of the things you've shown us over the last 6 or 7 months. There was some intrigue in the way I was listening to some of the aspects of how the cinematography came to be, the end of the day filming. I almost got caught up in watching it, and I was wondering whether you could introduce a little bit more on the cinematography background and a little more of that thought process. It was just absolutely breathtaking to watch so much of it. And Lisa, as you sort of described in your opening, a little bit like viewing fine artwork.
Well, thank you for those comments, David. Lisa, do you want to? I have some thoughts on cinematography, but why don't you start us off?
Sure. Thank you for your comments, and I'm so glad that you enjoyed Days of Heaven and the cinematography in particular. I really don't have another film that I can pull out of thin air that looks anything like Days of Heaven, and it really is because of the cinematography. The whole crew was just shocked at Terrence Malick's faith in what could be captured. And I mean, how little light there could be to still capture images on film. And Nestor Almendros, the primary cinematographer for the film, was kind of a perfect companion for this because he was actually going blind at the time that he filmed this. And so light to him was a completely different sensory experience, I suppose, than even for Terrence Malick. And so the challenge for everyone shooting this was to push the extremes of what could be captured in the lowest amount of light sometimes. And it rendered something that is unlike any other image I've ever seen. Andrew, do you have additional details to add?
Yeah, so Nestor Almendros is, I believe, Cuban-born, and he spent the early portion of his career and gained his at least early notoriety working in European cinema, particularly with Francois Truffaut, with whom he made a few films at least. And Days of Heaven was his first American film, and he was. He and Malick were really collaborators on the look of the film in a way that I think is probably more the exception than the rule in Hollywood productions. I think that's probably a combination of the challenging conditions, of the relatively distant location shooting, and the nature of the artistic influences they both agreed or were interested in incorporating. Lisa mentioned in her introduction about magic hour, that time at the end of the day. And what that basically is the sun has set. If you look in the sky, you won't actually see the sun anywhere, but because the light from below, sunlight from below the horizon is still sort of making its way through the atmosphere and refracting through the clouds and the atmosphere, there is still light in the sky, even though the main source of light isn't there. And that has an kind of this otherworldly glow to it. And it is a way to, if you limit yourself to shooting during that time, you're actually obviously, as Lisa alluded to, sort of making your shoot very difficult, because you've got maybe 25 minutes or half an hour a day to shoot under those conditions. At the same time, in a sense, if you're always shooting that at that time, you don't have to worry about where shadows fall the way you do if you're trying to shoot the same scene that takes place at 9 a.m. and you're shooting it at 9 a.m. and noon and 3 o'clock, and the sun has moved across the sky. But obviously, the notion of only shooting 25 minutes a day or something along those lines was anathema to the Hollywood crew, as Lisa mentioned. You don't typically have a situation where the director, the cinematographer, you often have a scene where a situation where a director and a cinematographer are committed to a look of a film. You don't often have a situation where they are committed to such a specific, and at least from the necessity to achieve it, extreme visual look, and have the ability to carry it out, to execute it. And in this case, it in part came from the relatively rare for the time situation or circumstances of the production, which was the producers basically made a deal with Paramount and agreed to pay for any overages out of their own pocket, which gave them the ability to say yes or no to Malick and what he was trying to do. As Lisa mentioned, cinematographer Almendros had to leave to go make another film with Truffaut, and the shoot went on for so long that Haskell Wexler, who is a very noted cinematographer in his own right, although not one noted for the same type of look, took over for Nestor. And I say Nestor like I know him, excuse me, Almendros. Haskell Wexler is known for, he directed Medium Cool, which was a film shot at and basically about the '68 Democratic Convention. He shot Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which was for its time a pretty gritty drama. So the idea that he was going to seamlessly pick up this very, very specific and warm look was, was in itself, in a way, to my mind, as much of an achievement as what Almendros had achieved to begin with. But in any case, it caused some static for some years, because if you watch the film all the way through, you see that Wexler's credit is, additional photography by or something like that. And he watched the film and timed it and figured out that he actually shot more than 50% of the footage that appeared in the final cut. And he was pretty miffed about his limited credit, but I think eventually made peace with it. Anyway, that's a long way of talking about some of the things you asked about, David, and some things you didn't ask about. So we'll go on to the next topic now. Joss, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I do. And thanks to Lisa for recommending this film. I'd never seen it before, or I'd heard about it for many years, and it certainly was beautiful. We were inspired to see Badlands after we saw this, which we actually did this morning. And it really is they are companion pieces of similar themes, similar characters, clearly more developed in Days of Heaven, but I would recommend Badlands to anyone who hasn't seen it. There's so much to talk about, but I'm just going to focus on a couple of things. In her introduction, Lisa talked about montage editing and how it lent some tension to the film. And I'd like her to elaborate on that and explain, if you can, how that works. But before you get to that, I also wanted to comment on Richard Gere. And he was relatively young at this point, early in his film career. And it seemed to me, as in other films he had been in around that time, that he lent an air of tension and danger. There was just something dangerous about his physical performance, as if he was stalking or always ready to pounce. And that, I think, contributed to some of that feeling as well. So certainly comment on that, but really I'd like to hear what you have to say about the editing. And thanks again.
Thanks, Joss. I'm glad you enjoyed the film so much. For the editing style, and Andrew may correct me if I'm using this term incorrectly, but I kind of liken it to montage, where there are certain sequences in the film that play out quite traditionally. A shot follows another shot, and they show an event unfolding in time and space that doesn't make you wonder why there's a buffalo inserted out of nowhere. But the rest of the film, most of the film, is connected. Every shot is connected more thematically and spiritually to kind of bring together a sense of tone, or a sense of what the event is that's unfolding, without showing you from A to Z every single step along the way. I mean, if you think about the opening scene in Chicago, where you have this collection of images that give you an indication that Richard Gere has done something terrible to someone who may or may not be his foreman, I guess, and that has caused them to run away. But so you come away from that scene knowing the contours of what happened, but every shot within that doesn't necessarily take you on that journey A to Z. It's more about seeing the sparks flying off of the iron heated up that conjure up this industrial hellfire. It's more about the trek that Richard Gere takes down this dark corridor to run away, as he will run away many other times throughout the film. So it's very different from traditional continuity editing. And Andrew may or may not agree with me calling it montage, but that's how I relate to it. At the very least, it's elliptical editing. He does not give you every single piece of the equation. He allows you to fill in the blanks with his editing.
Yeah, I think it is elliptical, and elliptical editing, the term comes from something we're probably all familiar with from reading and writing, which is ellipsis, right? Where you see a quotation, you know, a chunk taken from a book or someone's interview or something, and there's that ... in the middle because what they said there wasn't relevant or on point or whatever. So that's sort of elided, and then the rest of the statement is continued. And here, the editing is elliptical in that it doesn't, you know, absent that ellipses in something you're reading, you would have a statement broken up by something, then the rest of the statement, and you wouldn't sort of have that gap appear. Well, that's kind of what Lisa was saying, and the film definitely is that way. It's less interested in, as she said in her introduction, and again just now, the sort of strict rules of continuity that the vast majority of Hollywood films tend to follow. That is that you're never disoriented as a viewer, you're never confused as a viewer, you're never wondering what you're seeing or when it's supposed to take place within the chronology of the film. There is nothing left to doubt or question or chance. The thought process behind that being that doubt or question or chance in the mind of a viewer is bad, because they will fall out of the film. They will no longer be engaged, engrossed, what have you. And the sort of mantra in Hollywood for decades, and some would argue forever, was to never do anything to challenge or disorient or confuse or, you know, really make think too much the audience. And that's how, in a way, how continuity editing developed. I mean, to be fair, the people who developed it were creating a new medium and were telling a story in images, and that moving images, and that hadn't been done before. So there is that. You know, I don't want to be completely cynical about it. But once you establish these rules, you can then depart from these rules. And that's what Malick is doing here. And I think what Lisa said about montage is a very good way to think about it. I don't usually, you know, I'm not much for self-promotion, but every week I do this Ask Andrew short little mini lesson. And one a couple weeks ago was about montage. What is montage editing? And that word has meant different things in different cinemas and at different points in film history. But the bottom line is it's shots that are collected and edited together, not based on strict rules of continuity, but rather because putting those together creates a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. So if the example Lisa gave us of the opening shots in that factory in Chicago, if we simply described what we saw in each of those shots, you know, he throws something into the furnace, he looks nastily at his foreman, the foreman yells at him, he throws something else into the furnace, blah, 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 blah. We don't get from that the overall message of that sequence, which is, here is a character who is bristling under the conditions in which he's working, probably more so and perhaps more unreasonably than any of his fellow workers. And he's not going to take it. He either is special or thinks he's special and is going to lash out because he can't help himself. And he does that. And that is not only an important incident to start the film off narratively, but it also shows us, not tells us, shows us a great deal about his character that, if you bear it in mind, makes what happens further on down the film that much more, I think, interesting and also tragic. So that's what's happening, and that's happening throughout the film. I mean, watching this movie, I watched it again, and there are shots where you don't know where they fall. I mean, Lisa mentioned the shots of the animals that don't, strictly speaking, add anything to the story or to the characters, the human characters. But you also wonder about chronology sometimes and things like that. But the point isn't for us to know in a sort of very, you know, literal, linear way where everything's happening. Our point for us is to understand what's happening more broadly, more thematically, on a grander scale, because this is a movie about bigger things than its plot, I think. Okay. Gosh, I really have to make myself talk less. I'll work on that. Robert, you have your hand up. You have a question or comment?
Oh, thanks. Well, last time in class, I told everybody that I had never seen a film like The Birds that had absolutely no music. Now today, I want to tell everybody that I don't think I've ever seen a film with so little dialogue. Although you guys might know better than I on that, but just in my own experience. And it just seems to fit in with the montage editing that Lisa was talking about. And because it's more about visual, telling a story visually. And it also reminded me of silent films. I almost think that you could make this into a silent film and it would work. You could see the emotions, you could follow what was going on by their faces and their body language. The second point I wanted to make is that I saw this film as about a child. The narrator was a child, the little girl, and I think she was 9 years old. And what happened to her, it's really not about what happened to those three characters. It's more about what happened in that girl's life. So that her life being so insecure and what she went through, and she was almost like this detached observer, kind of a cynical, like nothing could really faze that girl. And it was about her, really, in the end. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. You're absolutely right, I think, about the dialogue. There's a lot more to the dialogue in the screenplay originally, but obviously Malick and his editor went in another direction over the 2 years of post-production. Lisa, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, you said it very well. This was a very dialogue-heavy film initially, and throughout the post-production process, they just chopped away more and more dialogue to the point that Richard Gere was actually pretty upset about all this dialogue that was cut out. But Malick really is focusing on nonverbal channels here. I mean, even the dialogue that does exist in the film, I can't even hear or understand a good portion of it. Like, it's just sort of whispers in a far off corner that are kind of overheard, but you don't actually get the meaning of, except the emotional meaning of. And I agree that silent film was something to take out of Days of Heaven, because it was a big inspiration for both Malick writing this and also Almendros filming it. But that nonverbal channels concept, I'm sure we'll talk about this more later in the discussion, but sometimes people, critics, audience members, think that there's not a lot of emotion in Days of Heaven. They don't get a lot of emotion out of the characters, find them blank. To me, there are few things more emotionally laden than Sam Shepard's face when he sees Abby, his wife, and Bill exchanging some inappropriate communication behind that gauzy curtain in the face of Richard Gere, when he realizes that what he thinks is a sham marriage is not so much a sham marriage anymore, and he's losing the woman he loves to a rich guy. So there are so many nonverbal cues throughout the film that are much richer, I think, than any dialogue could have possibly given us the same emotional response. And then you talked about Linda being the protagonist of the film, and I can absolutely see that that point of view. I love that opening montage of black and white photographs. A lot of them were actual photographs taken by photographers like Lewis Hine and a couple other very famous kind of photojournalists or sociologists turned photographers around the turn of the century. But the final photo in that lineup is of Linda Manz, who plays Linda, and connecting back to this idea that she's a part of that ancestry of America, of the immigrants of America, and that opening photo lineup, and then making this arc almost her arc and leaving us with her at the end. I do think that she is, while she's kind of on the sidelines of the actual plot, she's definitely a major focus for Malick, and clearly he has gifted her with a voiceover. So that's, we can all come away knowing that he thinks very highly of Linda Manz in this film and her character.
I agree with the points you just made, Lisa, about the emotional impact of, Shepard's face in those moments and things like that. I will never agree about the emotional impact of Richard Gere's face, because I don't particularly think much of him as an actor. So even if I thought there was emotional impact to his face in this film, I wouldn't allow myself to say it out loud. That being said, I do think that I do understand why people have said this film is a bit emotionally muted. And I think that if we think about what the ostensible plot is about the brother and the sister, or the couple pretending to be brother and sister, and the rich man, and all feeling duped and all that stuff, or being duped and all that stuff, that's a classic melodramatic plot. And we would expect a film with that plot to be much more overwrought, to have much more emotional excess, things like that. I think part of the reason it doesn't is because Malick's not interested in that. And I think part of the reason it doesn't, or part of the way he justifies it not having that, is he basically makes this Linda story. One of the simplest things that we all too often fail to do when looking at a movie is to ask ourselves, where does it start and where does it end? And who are we introduced to? Who do we see first? And who do we see at the end? And I think there's a good case to be made that this is Linda's story. And what we are learning about, or hearing about, or seeing about these relationships, these adult relationships, are her recollections of it, her explanations of it, her understanding of it. And though I think she's older than 9, I think she's probably 12 or 13 or something like that, the character is, she is still a child, and she has a child's interests at heart, which are, how does this affect me, understandably, and she has a child's understanding of things like what heaven and hell are and things like that. So I think that explains a great deal about the style of the film. Now, did they want to make a film in this style and then came to the notion of it being of Linda sort of telling us this story later? quite possibly, since we all know that her voiceover is recorded, very far into the post-production process, and the film wasn't initially designed that way. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I think it makes for a very effective storytelling, and you could argue that they had a real find in Linda Mance and decided to, to utilize her ability and her sort of her attributes to tell the story in the way they did. Jessica, you have a question or comment?
Hi, I'm reporting from Portland, Oregon, since you were asking where people are from.
Great.
Yeah, so I had a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. One is that I absolutely agree it's a breathtakingly gorgeous visual film. And I really appreciated the autumnal colors and how everything is just dripping in this magic hour light. And then I also noticed when we had these beautiful, gorgeous visuals, we also had people toiling away in the fields in the background. And often I noticed because of filming at magic hour, their faces were obscured. So you couldn't actually see them, which kind of lent a lot of credence to, I think, Linda's talking about how they were all replaceable. So I thought that was really interesting. And I wanted to talk more about the contrast of having this gorgeous light where everything looks like a still could be a painting. It's very painterly with kind of the physical labor that's going on. And then I don't know if anyone wants to talk about more too. I noticed so many biblical allusions and things going on, just even in the title of the film, but the plague of locusts and retribution, and it seemed very biblical. So those are some two themes I really picked up on, or two things.
Well, thanks, Jessica. We'll get into them for a bit. Lisa, do you want to start with, which one do you want to start with, Lisa?
Well, Jessica brought up labor first, so I'll start with labor. Thank you, Jessica, for your comments. Wonderful as always. The film, I love rewatching it because every time I get something a little different, and it's pretty, I would say, ideologically or politically neutral, except it's also not. Like there are definitely, I don't think that this is a politically progressive film, but class issues are a part of it. I think there are very deliberate choices made where we see the farmer, well, the farmer doesn't have a name, first of all. He's just the farmer, the rich guy. And we see him, sitting on these plush sofas under, a lacy umbrella in the wheat fields, while the depersonalized toilers are doing back-breaking work. And an accountant is adding up his totals and saying, hey, you're going to be the richest guy in the Texas Panhandle. All of that being said, I think Malick goes to great lengths to not demonize or even judge anyone in the film. Like, the farmer is not some industrialist capitalist pig. He is just the farmer. But there are definitely class issues here, and I love how it kind of relates to the house as well. Who can and cannot enter the house at the farmer's will. So, and then there are so many other little instances where the foreman says, hey, your pile's short, you're docked $3, or just all these little instances of the fact that these people are toiling under horrendous circumstances to enrich a farmer who is exploiting the land, essentially. All that being said, I love Abby's line about how when she was Linda's age, she would wrap cigarettes from morning to night and never see the daylight. And so there's something almost worthwhile about being a part of the natural world, even if it is under these backbreaking conditions. So the issues of class are fascinating and subtle in the film, but definitely there. And I'm glad you brought them up. And I love the comments about how the light backlit, these laborers are quite depersonalized in a way. So that's those are some of my comments on labor. Shall I pass it off to you, Andrew?
Well, she had another point about the biblical references. Do you want to comment on those first?
Yes, that is. I'm opening a can of worms a little bit because it's such a large part
Right.
of this film. I mean, we could have an hour-long discussion just on that and not even scratch the surface. But I for all the biblical references for this film and what Malick is doing with them in the context of the overall film experience, I kind of point to the key being in Linda's voiceover, as I believe you mentioned, Jessica, where you have this moralistic Christian vision that pervades Western experience. Even if we weren't born into a Judeo-Christian home, we kind of know the contours of religion because it's just part of the culture. But by putting that Christian experience in the mouth of Linda Mance as she is reciting these stories that quite, I mean, literally in one instance is just her reciting what someone named Ding Dong told her about the apocalypse. And so what Terrence Malick is doing there, by having all of this commentary about heaven and hell and the devil and God and revelations, is to make you think critically about the meaning of those words. When you hear them from Linda Mance's narration, they sound detached because she is detached from them. Just for her, maybe just stories that she's hearing about, maybe even for the first time. I don't think Richard Gere is all that religious. But the voiceover and the human experience in Days of Heaven is couched against this cosmic backdrop of the natural world, of transcendence, of the divine as manifest in the natural world. And so I think Terrence Malick is really working on two levels here to make us think about why we as viewers, as American or Western viewers, see that plague of locusts and think, oh, well, that's biblical retribution because of adultery or deception or sin, rather than it just being a plague of, or not even a plague, a swarm of locusts that see some pretty tasty looking wheat and the wind just blows them in that direction. So there are biblical references throughout, and one could make a case for it being a biblical allegory straightforwardly. But I personally look at it as a little more, a little deeper than just a straight biblical allegory.
I think that one way to think about it is that the Bible, one of the reasons that stories and themes from the Bible have such a resonance, even with people who would not say they are religious, people who've never read the Bible, people who are not of the religion that the Bible we're all referencing is at the heart of, or the religions that it's at the heart of, is because the themes and stories in the Bible are elemental, right? They're about many of them are about extremely basic human foibles, urges, dynamics, etc. And I think my guess or my assessment would be that is Malick's attraction to the things we are recognizing as biblical representations. I also think along those lines, he could have set this movie anytime he wanted, right? He could have told the story of the romance at any time frame, in any time period he wanted. He told it in 1915, 1916. And he did that, I think, for a reason. One of them being his interest in the natural world and what people do to it and what man has done to it. And I think this plays into the comments Jessica was making about the shots of the workers being, you know, backlit and their loss of individuality and their loss of humanity. It also explains all of the shots of the machinery and the sound, how the sound of the machinery dominated the soundtrack. We talk about the editing of the film. It's edited in such ways to make that contrast stark, right? We see the shots of the animals, you know, themselves. We hear the relative, you know, quiet and solitude of the, you know, Panhandle landscape. And then we are bombarded by that mechanized sound of the farm equipment, and then we see the shots of those animals, and they don't look so peaceful or at home or comfortable anymore. And showing that, focusing on setting the story at a time when equipment, when agriculture was being mechanized to such a degree, setting it at a time when the airplane enters American culture, when the automobile is gaining presence in American culture, when World War I, which was really sort of the first, you know, marked a huge step in the technology of war. To have it set during this time when all these things are happening can't be a coincidence. That there is an interest in, you know, what man has done to the planet, what technology and machines, what man has wrought with those. And those are things that are of the same sort of, you know, elemental order that many of the lessons of the Bible are. And I think that's probably where the connection lies. Joan, you have a question or comment? Joan Strank, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay. What happened was a lot of the comments have been made already, but I paid particular notice to the scene with the fire, which reminded me of Gone with the Wind, and also, the locusts on the field. I thought those were two beautiful scenes, and I wanted to comment on them.
Yes, you know, you're absolutely right. And again, there's rarely a force more elemental than fire, right? And the way that it spares nothing and no one in its destruction, but there's also something natural about it. I think that those, you know, those play into those sorts of themes. Lisa, did you have any thoughts on those portions of the film?
Yeah, I mean, they're part of the same long sequence, locusts leading to the fire scene. And Andrew, your mentioning of the element of fire. I mean, I think we've used the word elemental to describe this film a bunch of times, and it really fits because the fire is perhaps the most memorable of the four classical elements of nature in terms of the visual impact on the viewer. I mean, the fire scene was pretty dangerous actually because it got out of hand and they were concerned they might burn the grasslands of Alberta down. It was pretty dangerous from what people talking about, the people who were on the set talking about it nowadays were saying. But the elemental nature of the film does also include the other three elements. I mean, water and earth and wind or air are just as eloquently and thematically woven into the film throughout, and even kind of associated with the four main characters that we have. I mean, Linda even goes so far in one of her narration bits to say that she's thinking about her future and she might be a mud doctor. I mean, she's pretty directly identified with kind of the element of the earth, and that voiceover always grounds us whenever it pops up in our ears within the film. So yeah, the element of fire is definitely the most striking and magnificent, to use it, the most awe-inspiring word I can pull up right now in the film. It's a tremendous scene, and the locusts as well. That whole sequence is just a showstopper. So I'm glad you enjoyed that scene.
Dana, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, hiya.
Hi.
All right, so I'm going to step in it a little bit here because I have a very personal love-hate relationship with Terrence Malick. So I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but I'll just say quickly that I started out kind of backwards from, I think it's Joss, who said he saw this film and then he watched Badlands. I think a number of years ago, we saw Badlands in one of our classes. And I fell in love with this director. And then I went out and got this movie. And I was just completely overwhelmed by the beauty of the way this man makes films. And then I saw Tree of Life. So I don't want to go into it too much, but I want to warn anybody that if you go out next and go see Tree of Life, it's going to be quite a different kind of movie. And I was really disappointed. So my comment / question is, what do we do when we sink our souls in with directors and we think we love the way they do things, and we assume that they're taking us on journeys that they are planning for us, and then we find out later, much to our dismay, that they don't really plan these journeys, but sort of, perhaps, I want to be careful here, but I sort of feel like just sort of throw things against the wall to see what sticks. And I'm asking this because I am ambivalent about the voiceover. I know, Andrew, how you feel about voiceovers, and I'm curious how you feel about this particular voiceover, because I think this is a very different and a very beautiful movie without the voiceover. And I think I'm a little offended that it was done after the fact. It was done, Linda Mance was allowed to just say whatever she wanted, and then it was edited, and that's our finished product. So you mentioned before, Andrew, that the product that we get is the product we have, so be it. But I'm wondering, is it? And are we allowed to say, wait a minute, what you were giving us was something so special. Why did you do that? So I don't know if I really made much sense, but my heart is broken by this director a little bit because I loved him so much, and then I was disappointed. So just talk about that process a little bit and perhaps the voiceover. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Dana. I will say that, I think if this movie didn't have the voiceover, it would have played, you would have viewed it, we all would have viewed it a lot more like the movies later in his career that you were just talking about, and not so warm a glow. You're absolutely right. I always say that 9 times out of 10, voiceover is a sign of a film's weakness and of storytelling weakness, because you should be able to show to show the story you're telling, and you shouldn't have to have someone sort of walk us through it and spoon feed it to us. I don't think that's what her voiceover does. I don't think her voiceover really tells us anything we don't know, as much as it is a commentary, almost a way, sort of like a parallel track to what is happening in the film. I also think it reminds us that what we are seeing, if you agree with this take on the film, that what we are seeing, you are seeing it through the eyes of a girl, of a young person. And I think her voiceover serves to remind us of that. Before we got on, before the discussion started, Lisa asked me, we were talking about the movie, and Lisa rightly came away with the impression that she is more of a Malick fan than I am. And I said to her that 94 minutes is just the right amount of Malick for me. And I think a lot of us would agree that there are some things that we enjoy very much, but you can only take them in certain doses and certain contexts. And for me, that's how I would describe a film directed by Terrence Malick or Robert Altman. The thing I feel they share in common, in addition to being among two of Lisa's favorite filmmakers, is that they do that thing that Dana, I thought, she might have felt she was being a bit tongue in cheek, but I think she's right on. They sort of throw it up there and see what sticks, or at least that's the impression we're left with. Or that's one way to perceive what we are being presented. Maybe that's a better way to say it. And it all too often feels that way for me, and I don't appreciate it, as Dana doesn't either. On the other side of the ledger, though, I feel like just because the plan changes from what you had in mind going in, doesn't mean that it's any less legitimate of a project or product or creative endeavor. I can tell you, and nobody's really going to care, but it's the closest example I can come up with. I went to college and then I went to graduate school and I got a Ph.D. So as you can imagine, I had to write a lot of papers. I had to write a lot of papers about movies, and I would watch the movies and I would have ideas about the movies, and I would write the paragraphs making my case about these different portions of these movies without really an idea of what tied all those points together. And I would almost never write the opening of my paper until I'd written the rest of my paper. And so I didn't know really what my point was until I had made my point. And I sort of feel like that's kind of, not to compare myself to Terrence Malick, but I sort of feel like that's the filmmaking equivalent, or that's the academic equivalent of what Malick did with this film. And, Northwestern gave me my degree, so it's at least a serviceable approach to things. And I think that in some cases, when, for example, the movie is limited to 94 minutes and not twice that length, it can be a very interesting and eye-opening exercise. But I also think it can very often not be that, at least to my mind. Lisa.
Well, thank you for that. Before you go,
Oh.
Thank you for that, Andrew. And now I totally understand why you are the way you are.
Okay, well, you don't need to say any more about that. Lisa, your thoughts?
Well, to be completely honest, I have mentally checked out of Malick post The New World. Days of Heaven is, it's one of my favorite movies ever. I truly love Days of Heaven. But like Andrew said, Malick at a tight 90 or 94, that's perfect Malick. And I think it's kind of like serendipitous that I have The New World as my last loved Malick film, because to me, the New World and Days of Heaven kind of, if you inverse them, they kind of form bookends to, American pioneerism and the West. So I'm kind of I'm happy to stick with my New World as the cutoff point. I caught Hidden Life, not to digress, but I caught a Hidden Life as the most recent one, and by hour 3, I wanted to crawl under my seat. So I'm very happy for anyone that likes current Malick, but not for me. That being said, I want to go back to your voiceover comments. I am sad to hear the voiceover. Whenever anyone says that the voiceover doesn't work for them in this film, I always get a little sad, because to me, it's just the most amazing voiceover in all of film history. It is just a precious jewel of a voiceover, because it is so very different from Badlands' voiceover. Terrence Malick scripted exactly what he wanted Sissy Spacek to say, and she said it, and that was the voiceover, and it was great. It was great voiceover, but this is different. Like it's almost like another shade of the landscape. And like I said earlier, I kind of see, for me personally, I see the keys of my own understanding of what Malick is doing with his religious allegory here. I see the key to that in Belinda's voiceover. So it's a very meaningful voiceover to me, but certainly the film would have been a very interesting watch even without it. But I think he chose correctly in adding it in post.
No, I mean, I think he did. I think it's, for the reasons you said and others, I think it's critical to the movie. Yeah, I mean, I agree that for someone who thinks most voiceovers are a waste, I think this is one of the best ones. Although my saying that that's a faint praise, I guess. Barbara and Richard, perhaps you have a question or comment.
Yes. Good evening. This film was new to me, as is the work of Malick. And so when I walked away from it, I had two questions. One is a very kind of superficial question, and the other a deeper one. The superficial one, just so I don't forget, is I was curious about the accents that were being used by the actors. Until I learned they were from Chicago, it sounded to me like Brooklyn. I just didn't understand it. And it seemed to get in the way a little bit for me. But more significantly, I walked away wondering why Malick made this film. And it seemed to me that it was an interrogation of morality on a number of levels, and that the visual nature of the film was very good at juxtaposing different levels. So in terms of the plot, we have the decision of this couple to do something deceitful, but it's against the background of how they're part of this exploited class and mistreated by overseers. And then, of course, as has been mentioned, even these larger themes of the destruction of the environment and the treatment of the natural world, which toward the end of the film, we even see is, connected in some way to World War I. I mean, it's really devastating. So I'm just wondering about your thoughts about the overall reason for this film. And again, about those accents. Thanks.
Well, I agree with you about the accents. I think that, I think Linda Mance was such an interesting performer and had such an interesting way of speaking that I would have let that go too, even though it does not sound like a Chicago accent. I think we should probably all consider ourselves lucky that no one had Richard Gere try an accent. So yeah, I think the accents don't work, but I mean, that's a story in American cinema at the very least is as old as the medium itself. Regarding the connection of the film to morality, I have a thought, but Lisa, did you have something you wanted to say on that?
I think that in Days of Heaven and in all of Malick's films, he's just at the very base level, just trying to question our preconceived beliefs and notions, and a lot of them, surrounding our place in the natural world. But I think if I can speak for Malick, at least from Days of Heaven, I think that he sees morality as a human construct. And I think it's fascinating that the film is a morality tale, but it's also not, because we sympathize, we find ourselves sympathizing with all of the characters, the farmer, the woman who's caught between, the guy who's losing his love. So I think morality is so interesting in Days of Heaven because it both exists in the film, but it exists as a human construct in the backdrop of the natural world, where morality doesn't exist for animals, And the accents, I'll just briefly say, Linda Mann's was from New York, unsurprisingly. And so her accent is pure bliss to my ears, but definitely an interesting listen all the same. Those are some of my thoughts, Andrew.
Malik, before he went to school for film and he went to AFI, he was a journalist, and he wrote for the New Yorker and other publications. And he was also something of an academic. He initially studied philosophy, and in fact has as at least one of his publishing credits, a translation of a book by the philosopher Martin Heidegger. So the notion that he would be interested in morality, but perhaps not in the sort of traditional, relatively simple, not invalid, but simple way that Hollywood typically dealt with it, particularly in Westerns, wouldn't surprise me. And I also think that I think something that Lisa's been saying throughout the discussion is really important to bear in mind. And I have to be honest, it's not something I thought of until she said it, but that he's presenting these things, some of which are familiar, or at least appear to be familiar thematically, in a way to get us to think about them differently. And I think that, I think the combination of something that is very human and clearly a situation that could be guided by, by morality, namely the love triangle and that all those human relationships, juxtaposing that with humans, the way humans treat each other on a grander or a class scale, and juxtaposing that with the way humans treat animals and the land, and the way nature treats humans, is, I think, all part of getting us to think about morality in different ways and questions of right and wrong in different ways. And I think that's something he's interested in, and sort of questioning the accepted elements of human nature. I think he's interested in that. I think it doesn't always make for easy to digest or enjoyable films, but there's no law that says that movies have to be that. There's no law, thankfully, that says we have to see movies that aren't that either. Rena, you have a question or comment?
Yes, what you just said was very helpful in understanding Malik, and I'm going to just add something that I think adds on to that. So the wife-sister theme is very common in Genesis. It appears, I think, 3 times. But usually what happens is that, first of all, the reason is like Abraham's fear of Pharaoh. So, and that because Sarah's so beautiful, so he presents her as his sister. And God intervenes so that Pharaoh will not, commit a sin and violate someone else's wife. So here it's a whole different plot line, because there is no God who's going to intervene to fix it. And the reasons for hiding it or fear of what other people will say, not, fear for one's life. And even the locusts, they're not, the locusts may look like it's a plague from God, but then the human beings set fire to everything, and the 2 men attack each other, and that has nothing to do with an outside force. That has to do with how humanity makes a mess of things, which fits into all the other mechanization and social class, et cetera, that you've been talking about.
Well, thank you. I think that's a great way to put some of the different things that have been touched upon into perspective and to connect them with each other. Thank you very much, Rena. Let's see. Ken, you have a question or comment?
Yes, this is really the first Malick movie I've seen, so I didn't have anything to compare it to. I thought it was very stylish. I enjoyed the artwork and the way that house sat out on the field and everything about that. Maybe because I didn't understand the biblical parts, I had a little trouble with the substance of it. It was a little hard to keep up with or to gather out of it. And I have to agree with you, Andrew. I've never been a big fan of Richard Gere. I think his accent that he talks is the same. He seems to almost play the same character in every movie he's in, the ones that I've seen him in. And maybe I'm the only one who gets bothered by these things, but his hairstyle and also the Sam Shepard's hairstyle, they didn't look like it was from the 1900s. He looked like he came right off the set of American Gigolo. The way he wore his clothes, the way he strutted about. Even that jumpsuit when he was working on his motorcycle looked like it was custom fit. I feel like they took him out of a 1980s movie and just plopped him into this. And as I said, I'm the only one who gets bothered by these things, but it did bother me a bit.
Okay. Well, thanks, Ken. I will acknowledge that I think that, it's very difficult for a film to not look like even in some sort of, to not have some remnant of the era in which it was made, the period in which it was made. And part of the problem is that when you're in that moment, when you're in 1976, you don't realize what a 1976 haircut looks like. Right. And I agree with you that I was actually bothered by Sam Shepard's hair more than anything else. Not bothered like more than anything else in the grand scheme of things. I mean, just these other little sort of small points, but all movies have these things. All movies have these things that, mark them as being of their era. I mean, Star Wars looks like a 1970s sci-fi movie, right? So it doesn't look like a sci-fi movie. It looks like a 1970s sci-fi movie. That's something that movies have to deal with, and we can sort of take it or leave it, and let it define the movie or not, I think. Lisa?
I think Richard Gere is not my favorite actor or anything, but I feel like I need to be an apologist for Richard Gere in this movie.
You don't need to be, you're choosing to be.
I think that the cockiness and prettiness of Richard Gere, the person, was very well leveraged in this role. It was actually his first major film role. Post-production took so long that Looking for Mr. Goodbar, waiting for Mr. Goodbar came out.
Looking, I think.
Thank you. Came out before Days of Heaven. So, this wasn't necessarily the first time that people really got a good look at him. But I like the elements of his character in the film, that he is something of a dandy. Like he's not he doesn't want to be a worker in a steel mill. He doesn't want to be a day laborer. He has bigger ideas in mind, and he sort of dresses and looks the part. Like he has the most gorgeous outer. I would like to own some of that outerwear of his. It looks very nice. For the record, I don't remember the name of the costume designer, Patricia someone, I believe. Famous lady, I can't remember the name right now, but she handmade a lot of the wardrobe in this film, because they used so many extras that it was impossible to find dead stock, circa 1910s clothing for everyone. So I do think that, and someone said in the chat it was nominated for costumes at the Academy Awards. So I do think that the costuming is something that isn't, to me, anachronistic. I just think Richard Gere's character is pretty snappily dressed because that's his choice at the time.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's Patricia Norris was the name you were thinking of, and you're right. I think the costumes are exceptionally sort of period appropriate, just because they might seem not appropriate to us. I would trust the research that someone like Norris would do more than I would trust my sense of what people wore in the 1910s. And I think you're right. I mean, he thinks he's destined for better things, and he has a sense of entitlement. And I think that, you know, congratulations, casting Richard Gere for that guy was, you know, was right. He was also great in Primal Fear, where he's supposed to play an unbelievably arrogant lawyer. You know, congratulations, a broke clock is right twice a day. Let's see, Janice, you have a question or comment? Okay, we'll come back to you. Jody, you have a question or comment?
I'm here. I am here. I was having
Okay, Janice, go ahead.
with the system.
Okay.
I was very interested in this film as far as the time and the place and the setting. I'm glad you were kind of talking about that before. I mean, at the very beginning of this, you're very obviously in the Industrial Revolution. You're seeing, you know, a foundry and all the fire, and the next moment, there's all these agrarian workers on top of a train going out to the middle of the Panhandle, an area that I'm not all that familiar with, but it was rather, I almost felt like a lot of this could have been peasants in Russia. I mean, for the way that these, the workers all came out on the top of the train and they had no place to live. They were all living out in the fields and stayed there until the job was finished and left, and then all came back after, you know, when a season came around again. It was just, and there was also this feeling that things were going to happen that didn't. At least it made me afraid. I had never seen this type of machinery working before. It seemed very dangerous to me. With the way the people were just throwing things right next to it and so on, so that I felt like even the setting there had commentary as far as social commentary. And the other thing in terms of social commentary, that this is not the first time I've been struck with it, is that when you have something taking place at a time like this and in a place like this, where even with luxury, it's hard to differentiate between how much better the life is of a rich person. Surely there was this lovely house, but in terms of the kinds of things that we're used to rich people having, or things that we're used to everybody having, you couldn't have those kinds of things, whether, you know, plumbing and electricity and all of that. I'm not quite sure what they had. They didn't really go into that so much, but my feeling was that there really wasn't all that much difference in some ways, even though there's a great deal of difference in others. And the whole setting like that seemed biblical to me also.
Thank you very much, Janice. I think that Janice's point about the sort of apparent universality of the workers, of the dynamic, of the settings, I think that's an important one, because that's a good sort of point in favor of Malick being interested in themes sort of bigger than or beyond what the story that he's telling. Lisa, did you have other thoughts on what she was saying?
No, I appreciated that perspective, because when I think of Days of Heaven, I think of a through and through American meditation. You know, the idea that, yeah, you could be working in an iron mill in Chicago, or rolling cigarette papers day through night, and then you wind up in the Texas Panhandle searching adventure and new work, and you marry someone and you're rich. Like, it's I appreciated the idea that this could be an elemental story that takes place anywhere, anytime, because I always see it first and foremost through the lens of Americana and American ideals, especially the end, where you kind of have two twin threads, where Linda is, you know, running off in search of adventure, and has that pioneering American spirit, whereas Abby is very content with a sense of domestic life that has room for art and dance and culture, and is curious in a completely different way. But those two are both completely equal and relevant choices for anyone in America to make. So I appreciate your perspective.
And I think the point that Sam Shepard's life was not, Sam Shepard was the richest man in the Texas Panhandle, which is a pretty big area. Would you rather be able to live the life that he was living then, or would you rather live the life of someone today who is at the 50% point, the median income in the state of Pennsylvania? Think of the things that are available to that person today who is very far from being rich, to the person then who is the richest man in a huge area. And it's an interesting point about progress. It's also an interesting point about how there are some things that, thinking of that film, that money can't protect you from, like locusts and fire and other things like that. And I think that's probably part of Malik's bigger point as well. Jody, you have a question or comment?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I love the breathtaking artwork of this film. My naive question is, why was Linda's voiceover was selected, and how this film would have taken different perspective, different trajectory if voiceover would have been of someone else instead of Linda? Your thoughts?
Okay, thank you for that, Jody. Lisa, do you want to take this one?
I think I would have been severely less interested in anyone else. That sounds terrible to say, but I can't imagine the film without it being Linda, because as someone else in the conversation said, she's the lens through which we view these adults and their human foibles. And I think we needed a step back from that love triangle to really appreciate the contours of it, and how genius that it's through the eyes of a child that we get such deep emotional resonance out of it.
Yeah, I agree. Any other possible candidate for the voiceover would not have been one step closer. They would have been two steps closer, because it would have been one of the people involved in the love triangle. And so that distance to look at this thing as a more abstract dynamic, or a more abstract lesson in human nature and human behavior, I think would have been lost if it had been someone else's voiceover. Ellen, you have a question or comment? Okay, let's see. Corliss, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I've seen this movie many times.
Ellen, we'll come back to you in a minute, please, okay?
I'll be waiting.
Thank you. Corliss, go ahead.
Sure, I've seen this movie many times. It's one of the few movies that we actually have on disc. We don't have a large collection of movies at all. But there's a lot of foreshadowing in the movie, and I notice more and more each time and understand where it came from. But the one thing I see each time and have never been able to figure out is the glass and the water. When they go out at night and they're having the wine and their little tete-a-tete in the middle of the night, and he drops the glass and they leave it there, and he shows a picture of it in the shot. Anybody have any idea what that means?
Well, we will talk about it. Thank you very much for the question, Corliss. Lisa, you look like you have a thought on that.
I do have a thought on that. I love that shot, and I'm so glad you brought it up. I'll kind of take a step back and say that I love the audio visual rhythm of this film. We haven't even talked about the amazing soundtrack yet, but there are so many mirroring rhythms throughout the film, both orally and visually. And I see, I think we talked about elements before, and I see so many kind of mirroring or rhythmic shots in specifically the uses of the elements, the fire connecting back to the harvest bonfire that was much happier at the beginning of the film, etc. That water shot, to me, connects to the incredible shot that we get at the end of the film when Richard Gere's character is shot and he breaks the surface of the water full face. I mean, it's really a striking shot. And there are so many kind of similar mirroring images where we have shots of birds, and then we get the plane with the Italian circus. There's just so many mirroring shots, and to me that shot in the water of the glass dropped to break the surface so casually and indifferently is mirrored poignantly in the shot of Bill breaking the surface of the water at the end.
Had never thought about it that way. That's interesting. I'm glad you brought up the music, because I think the music is fabulous. It's one of the best soundtracks to any movie I've ever seen.
Thank you very much, Corliss. Yes, I thought of that shot as, Corliss mentioned foreshadowing. I thought of that shot of the glass under there in the water as a bit of foreshadowing of this whole thing unraveling. Like, that just seemed like a very sort of indulgent thing, a really sort of sense of entitlement that they don't have to care about that. I mean, it's not theirs, and I mean, I'm pretty sure even a rich person cares if some of their nice china gets left out in a stream. So yeah, I thought that was a sign of sort of their arrogance or their entitlement at that moment, right before things all sort of start to unravel. Okay, now Ellen, now we're ready for you.
Oh, here I come. Okay, which comment? So many have gone by. The Foreman. Someone watched the movie and said they did not see it as a story about God. The Foreman I saw as God. For one thing, he was craggy faced and old, and he watched everything. And he went up to Richard Gere's character and said, "You take care of him. I raised him like a son." To me, that's a God figure. Did anybody else see that? That's my first question. Second question would be, was the narration put in as an afterthought, or was it planned? Because I thought that Linda could not have known all the things that were told in the story, especially what happened between the new husband and wife in their bedroom. Linda couldn't have known that. She wasn't there. So how could she narrate it? Okay.
Right. Thanks a lot, Alan. To the first point about the Foreman, I think the film has religious themes, and I think the film is interested in humanity at sort of that micro level, that maybe that God's eye view. But and I think the Foreman is an interesting character, but I don't see him as sort of being in a comparable position. I think if we were trying to sort of, identify figures in a morality play, he doesn't seem to me to have that position of knowledge or power or influence that you would associate with a godlike figure. To the other point, I think that we often, and I know where you're coming from with this, Ellen, we often think of, we particularly go back to literature and we think about from whose point of view the story is told, and are we getting information that person can't know, and is that something of a cheat? And I think in a lot of cases it is, but I don't think this is the type of narration that is giving us other characters' insights or views of things. I don't think she ever tries to speak for another character. And I don't even think she's telling us what's happening as much as she's almost commenting on what's happening. And I don't think she comments on what happens in the bedroom or those other sorts of very private moments, though I could be wrong about that. I think I think your point is a fair one for the majority of voiceovers in movies. I just don't know if it applies to this one. Lisa.
I had never thought about the form in that way. It's an interesting take. I tend to agree with the perspective that Andrew brought up. Although I do we haven't talked about, this film's connection to genres, but I kind of see the foreman and the farmer being a little bit of a Western genre dynamic, male camaraderie. But I'd never thought of him having godlike, but he is very suspicious from the very start. So he does kind of see everything. Yeah, that's my comment on that.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this wide-ranging discussion of Days of Heaven. And we have a number of other programs coming up in our remote classroom. Tomorrow night, I am teaching a seminar on post-World War II American political films. It's the first time Hollywood takes on political and social issues in a significant way or a consistent way in its history. And there's a few reasons for that, and it's an interesting period. We have other seminars coming up as well. We have one on Alien in November, and we have Paul Wright teaching a seminar on The Office also in November. And then our last seminar of the year is another short cinema exploration from Gary Kramer, a film critic who goes to many festivals and always picks out really interesting short films to look at and discuss. If you want to know what next week's film is or other things that we have going on, please sign up for our emails. We have a lot of other programs and opportunities to do things, to watch movies and learn about movies besides this one, though we're very glad you're here for this. You can go to brynmarfilm.org and sign up for our emails. As I have said before, all of the people who join me for these discussions, who select the films, who make those wonderful introductions, people just like Lisa are volunteering their time and their expertise to do that. And I'm sure you join me in thanking Lisa for doing that. And in a related matter, Lisa wanted to share a point as well. Lisa.
Thank you, Andrew. I was preparing for this discussion over the weekend, and I had the opportunity to really think critically about what Bryn Mawr Film Institute means to me and what outsized impact it's had on my life. As Andrew said, I volunteer to work with Andrew in giving these moderated discussions, but I've been volunteering for the Bryn Mawr Film Institute for over a third of my life. Like I had to do the math a little bit when I was thinking about it over the weekend, but it's gifted me with such amazing connections and films, and these virtual film chats are so wonderful. I even check in some Mondays when I'm not participating with Andrew. And with that weekend reflection on just how important Bryn Mawr Film Institute is to me, I logged on to the BMFI website this morning and I made a monetary donation, because it's very important to me that the physical place of Bryn Mawr Film Institute continues to be a pillar of the community and a place where we can all meet and converse about film, watch film on the big screen. I saw Days of Heaven on the big screen a couple of years ago at Bryn Mawr Film Institute, and it was a gobsmacking experience. And then to talk with people afterwards was just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I just want to make an appeal to everyone to join me in thinking critically about what the Bryn Mawr Film Institute means to you and what your relationship to it has gifted you. Whether you're just joining virtually and it's a pandemic-based relationship, or like me, you go back many years with it. So I want to just allow that times are tight. This is a really difficult moment, extended moment for everyone, but if you can, it would mean a lot to me, it would mean a lot to the community and to Bryn Mawr Film Institute to make a donation if you can. It'll be put to great use. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you so much for I mean, I'm just so, you were gobsmacked seeing Days of Heaven. I'm gobsmacked that you made a monetary donation this morning, in addition to all of the donation of your time and knowledge and expertise and passion for cinema, not just over these many months we've been doing these virtual sessions, but for those of you who don't know, for years, I don't know Lisa well enough to know the fraction of her life it is, but for years, Lisa has been leading a Sunday night discussion, the first late Sunday afternoon of most months. Lisa runs a free discussion of one of our new release films. And she's been doing that for years. She also teaches seminars for us. She also has moderated discussions in French with a group of local French teachers. So if you have the ability to give, it would really mean a lot to us, as Lisa said. And I think the fact that Lisa has given so much in so many different ways over so long really says a lot, and is really, really gets me and my colleagues as well. Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you for our next discussion. And actually, I believe, Lisa, you will be joining us again next week, won't you? We're not going to say we're not going to say the movie, but you'll find that out. You'll find that out in our Thursday email, but it will be a discussion with Lisa. So something we can all look forward to, and another great film choice as well. So thanks very much for joining us, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.